This is going to be a tricky video. Mental health is a sensitive subject and often a deeply personal one. In this video, I'm going to be encouraging you in your role as a manager to talk more about mental health. But I also want to make something very clear. Your own mental health is yours, and it's up to you who you talk to about it and whether you talk to anyone about it. And the same goes for your team and your colleagues. I'm hoping that by watching this video, I'll help you think of ways to make it easier for you and your team to talk about mental health. But of course, no one should ever be made to feel that they have to disclose something they don't want to. Hey, how's it going? This is Scruffy Leadership. My name's Ben. So what do I mean by mental health, first of all? Probably the kinds of mental health issues you'll most commonly come across in colleagues at work are anxiety and depression. But mental health also covers things like eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. These things can be a long-term part of who you are, or they can appear from nowhere, or they can be there in the background and flare up from time to time, perhaps in response to a particular incident in life. In addition to these mental health disorders, there are also neurodevelopmental issues such as autistic spectrum disorder, ASD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, which, although not technically mental health disorders, can often be associated with things like anxiety and depression. If someone has a broken arm, and this means it's harder for them to do their job, it's a pretty easy thing for their colleagues and their manager to understand. The arm will be in a cast for a fairly predictable period of time, and although they won't become incapable of, for example, writing code, we know they'll be slowed down fairly dramatically. And unless they broke their arm by getting drunk and falling off the garden shed, people are going to be sympathetic and understanding towards them and their condition. And significantly, unless they're 100% remote, it's almost impossible for them to hide the fact that their arm is broken, and it's pretty unlikely that they'd want to hide it or feel the need to hide it unless they had incredibly poor psychological safety. In contrast, if you have, for example, anxiety or depression, it's invisible and often highly unpredictable. It might be fairly manageable one day and unbearable the next for no readily apparent reason. That means the only people who'll know you have it are the people you choose to tell. And in our society today, there's a fairly high likelihood that the people you tell won't really understand what it means, not in the way they understand a broken arm. Many people are afraid or even embarrassed to tell their manager about their condition in a way that they wouldn't be with many physical conditions. And if they do tell their manager that they have anxiety, for example, there's an unfortunately high likelihood that the manager won't really know what to do with the information. They might be embarrassed and find it difficult to talk about. They may even find themselves wondering, can this person still do the job I hired them for? Will their anxiety just go away one day? Will it cause them to have a breakdown in the middle of the office? What do I do about it? So why is there this big difference? Why are we so much more understanding about physical conditions than we are about mental ones? Unfortunately, as a society, we have for many years stigmatized mental health issues to the extent that people were locked away for their own good and given things like electroshock therapy for not being normal according to some arbitrary definition of normal. And why is this relevant to you as a manager? Well, if someone suffers from anxiety or depression, or if they have ASD or ADHD, it's most likely not something that just pops up from time to time, but rather it's something that they live with all day, every day. It'll get better or worse at different times, but it's quite likely always there. And that means it's there when they're at work. And that means it affects how they experience work and how they perform at work. So if someone you manage has, for example, anxiety and you know about it, you can put accommodations in place to help make their experience of work better for them. Depending on what source you believe, something like 20 to 25% of people have mental health conditions, and perhaps as many as 5% are experiencing severe mental health related symptoms at any time. And that means that unless your team is really tiny, there's a pretty high likelihood that this applies to someone in your team. And that means that even if no one in your team has told you about their mental health, you should probably be educating yourself about mental health and neurodevelopmental conditions. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should be doing detective work to try to figure out who has what condition, or trying to push people into telling you things they're not comfortable telling you. On the other hand, the first step should be making sure that your team knows that if they do have something that they want to tell you, that they can, and that you will react helpfully. So how can you do that? Well, one step, if you have a mental health condition yourself, is to talk about it. Tell your team, offer to answer any questions they might have. I actually did this at work a few years ago. I wrote a document which I shared with the whole company outlining my personal experiences with anxiety and OCD. And since then, I've found that other people are much more willing to open up to me about their own experiences. Of course, it shouldn't be this way. It should be easy and non-scary for anyone to at least tell their manager about their mental health. The reason I say this is that if someone in your team suffers with anxiety or depression, for example, or if they have ADHD or ASD, it's really helpful for them if you know about it, because it means you can do things to help them. At the very least, if your report tells you that they have a particular mental health or neurodevelopmental condition, You should listen, thank them for telling you, and ask them what impact it has on them. You might want to point them to someone more specialized in the organization, maybe in HR, who can talk to them about accommodations they might need. Better yet, though, you'll educate yourself about your company's policies in this regard and be ready to discuss them with the report. There's a few things to be careful of here, though. First of all, don't expect your report to know what they need from you. You can ask them if they do know what they need, but don't assume that they will. They really might not have a clue what you can offer them and therefore what they should ask for. Also, be careful not to start treating them differently after you have this information. Don't withhold opportunities you might otherwise have offered them because you're afraid their mental health will get in the way. Don't treat them with kid gloves. Continue giving them honest feedback, just as you do with all your other reports. Mental health is a huge subject, and this is a short video. If you know you have someone in your team that has mental health or neurodevelopmental issues, your next step, if you haven't done it already, should be to educate yourself about the condition. And the step after that should be sitting down with them and letting them know you have their back. You might not have anything concrete to offer them immediately, and that's probably fine. Just knowing that you will do what you can to support them is probably enough, at least to begin with. But here's a long-term vision for you to imagine. Wouldn't it be great if mental health was treated the same kind of way that physical health is at work? So not stigmatized, not something to be worried about telling anyone about. So, Lisa uses a wheelchair and Mark has anxiety. And although we don't pretend that those are the same thing, we put as much care and empathy into the way we approach both of them and are as careful in both cases to avoid discriminating against them. I don't think there's a quick and easy way to get there from where we are now. When I tell people that I take antidepressants for anxiety and that I'm in the care of a psychiatrist, it often visibly makes them uncomfortable. I don't want to discomfort them, but I do want us to all get into the habit of talking more openly about these things, because the more we do, the less uncomfortable it will become. So I'm not going to ask you to like and subscribe to this video. Instead, I'm going to ask you to do some research. Maybe you have a friend that you know has suffered from PTSD or depression in the past. Ask them about it. What experiences at work did they have that were helpful and what wasn't so good? Or do some internet research. Find out more about what is behind all of these 3- and 4-letter acronyms: ASD, ADHD, PTSD, OCD. Oh, and stop using them as punchlines in jokes. If you laughingly say, "Oh, that's just my OCD kicking in," imagine how your colleague feels if they actually do suffer from OCD and it's a really significant factor in their life. I don't want this video to make you feel bad or guilty, but I do want you to feel a little more empowered as a manager to address this stuff head on. Create a safe space for your team with the right kind of psychological safety so that they feel comfortable talking to you if they want to. Thank you for watching to the end of this video. I really appreciate it. Bye.